Once upon a time, I said I was going to do a whole bunch of Hunger Games essays and videos leading up to the launch of the fifth book this month. And that kind of got away from me. I still have that level of interest in and admiration for this property. I've just got so many things that take precedence over that as far as production time goes. That said, I started reading Catching Fire again today. It's been several years since I last read that book. And after the second chapter, maybe, I realized that I haven't read it since the fourth book came out in 2020. And, man, I just once again appreciated her execution, not just on this original trilogy, but on the follow-up 10 years later. The time span of this series in world is it's a little bit spread out in much the same way that the time span in between books being released is also spread out. The original trilogy was published between 2008 and 2010, and then the prequel came out in 2020, and then another, not really like prequel, but book in the series is coming out in 2025. But Suzanne Collins knows this world so well and has such a disciplined hand with interfering in it, at least so far, that she's able to do so deftly and competently without screwing anything up, but much to the contrary, augmenting it. And I wanted to highlight a particular scene in Catching Fire that really drives this home. So timeline-wise, this series takes place way after a post-United States of America collapse. There was the construction of a new country on top of it called Panem. By on top of that, I don't necessarily mean physically. I mean, in a political sense. A new country was organized with the capital in the Rocky Mountains. And Panem went through its own civil war. That was the Dark Days. And in the wake of that civil war, they said, all right, we're going to find some way to permanently hold what's left of this country in stasis. And that's what the Hunger Games was. In the beginning of the first book from 2008, the Hunger Games going on it's the 74th Hunger Games. So we get the 75th and the 76th, in a sense, by the end of that trilogy. The 2020 prequel, called The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, was about the man who would grow up to become the president of Panem and the supreme supervillain over it. In that book, it was only the 10th Hunger Games, and he was 18 years old. So doing the math, he's 83 years old by the end of the third book. So that's relevant then because it puts him at 83. 83 in the second book, excuse me. So he's an old man, he's lived his life, but he's very entrenched in his power, and the series explores not only how he got to that level of power, but also how he maintained it. Because from his perspective, the story is all about how you preserve and conserve something, keep it from changing, even if that means having to do morally unconscionable and unspeakable things like force children to murder each other every year and force the society to be compliant in it, or complicit in it, excuse me. At the end of the first book, Katniss ends up defying the Capitol by finding a way to have her and Peeta win the Hunger Games. And in the beginning of the second book, she gets a visit from none other than President Snow, who shows up to her house to threaten her, saying, like, hey, I know you weren't actually so in love with that boy, and you doing that ended up inspiring people to rebel, and the entire purpose of these games are to keep people from rebelling, to keep our thumb on the country. And if this whole thing comes apart because of you, it's going to be really, really bad. And Katniss obviously is wondering, how could he possibly know? And then she has a quick flashback to something that happened a little while after she got home from the Hunger Games between the first and the second books, and that is that she got kissed by Gale, by the boy who did not save her, but who was much more handy and handsome and all of that stuff. And this was especially troublesome because this happened in a place that she thought was extremely isolated from the view of the Capitol. It's a given in this setting that there is surveillance and all of that all over the place. But District 12, where Katniss lives, it's somewhere in Appalachia in coal country. It could be anywhere from Virginia to Pennsylvania at that point. But it's somewhere up there. And she was relatively assured that this meadow, not too far from her house, but a meadow and a lake with a couple of structures on the shore of the lake, that this place was far away from the prying eyes of the Capitol, and that's where this one-time thing happened between her and Gale. But something about it happening there made it so that the president found out about it. And at the time, before the prequel was published, at the time this just seemed to be the kind of thing that showed the evil and the reach and the knowledge of the government. That as soon as Katniss defied the Capitol in the Hunger Games and won so that she and Peeta could be saved and thus created this political problem for Snow, he said, okay, let's ramp up all kinds of surveillance on her, find out what she's all about, and you go from there. You could have safely assumed that that was it. You can glean these context clues from how the story is executed. But when you read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, the prequel that shows what he was like as a teenager, there is a development in the third act of the book where he, for reasons that would be very long to restate here, ends up having to travel from the Capitol and spend a few months in District 12. And while he's there, he falls in love with a local girl, but he's unable to let that love win out over his lust for power, which is at the core of his character dilemma. When he finally has a choice between love and power, he chooses power. And the one person who knows just what a real evil, dishonest, and untrustworthy SOB he is this girl that he otherwise fell in love with. She's able to escape him, and he is never 100% completely sure that she's not going to come back and completely ruin his life. She ends up becoming his ghost. The takeaway from it at the end of the prequel book, then, is that as he rises to the top of the highest echelons of power and becomes the supreme evil commanding force over Panem, there's still this question mark. A girl from 12 that could undo it all and will always be his personal ghost. And 65 years later, an uppity girl from District 12 ends up throwing his entire life's work into chaos. It amplifies that to just from just some vanilla threat to his power, or even an above average threat to his power, to a very personal threat. Katniss then becomes the reincarnation of that ghost from all those years ago. And it explains why Snow was willing to go to such lengths to take her down, to take her out. And especially because that conflict, when he was 18, between him and that girl that he loved, but then he had to turn on her, because it happened at that lake, in one of those houses, it shows that he knows the lay of the land up there. He knows what's up there. He knows what's in the woods, and it explains then, like it gives an even more plausible explanation as to why he would have that place bugged. If he knew about it, and if Lucy Gray Baird knew about it, then there's an increasingly great chance that Katniss would know about it. And so in his dropping of the hammer on her life, I mean, obviously they were able to glean that she knows how to hunt. That means she spends time out in the woods. That means we need to put surveillance out in the woods. Okay, he'll put that surveillance out in the lake and in the houses around the lake, and he will know. He will find her. It just made that reading of that chapter where Old Snow at age 83 shows up in District 12 to threaten Katniss Everdeen. It made that scene, which already worked, it made it so much better and so much more intense. That is what competent handling and expansion of an established piece really looks like. I had this same impression when I was watching season 2 of Smallville. There was an episode where Clark starts having these like weird flashbacks of memories that weren't his, but he realizes that his father, Jor-El, came to Smallville when he was not much older than Clark was at the time of that episode. And as he goes around like touching different things that his father also touched, he's able to kind of have flashbacks to like the 60s or the 50s, I think it was, and see where his father went. But it's important because it shows that his father also came to Smallville and that he had run-ins with the Kents. And what that allowed to happen, at least as far as the narrative goes then, is it explains then that that Smallville was not just some random dot on the map where Jor-El decided to send his son at the death of his planet, and that the Kents weren't just some random family. Oh, they're farmers, they must be good people. Like it took that randomness out of the equation. I think an even more apt comparison would probably be Rogue One, which is the single best Star Wars movie that Disney has made, other than Guardians of the Galaxy, but I digress. Because it more or less filled a plot hole. Not necessarily that it was a plot hole, but it was one of those fan theory things that fans have been picking apart for years. It's like, wow, this is a bit of an oversight. Why would they have built this like that? It's, well, we can tell the story in such a way that it doesn't undo anything from A New Hope, but rather it shows that this was done deliberately by a saboteur in such a way that it provided a critical weakness to the Death Star, but anybody who would have been on the lookout for that sort of thing wouldn't have noticed. And there you go. And it gave us just a fantastic Star Wars movie. The summary of all of this is that you've got to be very careful and very deliberate when you're going back to the well on something, whether it's something that you've established, the way that Suzanne Collins had established the Hunger Games, or you've been given the reins to something that somebody else established. Be careful, be delicate, be respectful, be creative, and be deliberate in how you approach tying something to that. Tie your creation to it in a way that only makes it stronger and better. And you'll end up creating something that's just as timeless and valuable and ultimately loved by the fans as the original idea was. Anyway, I'm going to finish reading Catching Fire this week. Today is Tuesday. It is the 4th. That means in exactly 2 weeks, the 5th Hunger Games book drops. Goodness gracious. I want to give this thing carte blanche and say that it is impossible for Suzanne Collins to screw up. The thing is that anybody can screw something up. But I have very, very high confidence in her work and optimism that she will not screw it up, that she loves what she has made, and she wants to continue to say important things with it. And as such, I really think that she's going to deliver here. I've got the hardcover in English on pre-order, I've got the audiobook on pre-order, and I've got the paperback in Spanish. on pre-order. English title is Sunrise on the Reaping. In Spanish, it is Amanecer en la cosecha. It's la cosecha, right? The reaping, the harvest. Can't remember the article. It ends with A, but there are irregular words that don't follow those rules. Anyway, thanks for indulging me. I'm very excited to go back to Panem and see what she does with this book. Till next time, drive safe. See you out there.